The gunshot echoed across the Montana prairie, freezing Flora Garrison's blood as she ran through the tall grass, her skirts hitched up to her knees. April 1874 had brought early warmth to Cottonwood Creek, but the chill in her heart had nothing to do with the weather. Behind her, the angry shouts of her father and brothers grew louder, their lanterns bobbing like vengeful spirits in the twilight. "You ain't welcome here no more, girl," her father's voice boomed. "Consorting with that filthy half-breed. You've brought shame to the Garrison name." Tears streaked down Flora's face as she pushed forward, her lungs burning. 22 years of being a dutiful daughter, reduced to this, banished from her home for the crime of loving Elijah II Hawks, the half-Crow translator who worked with the Army at Fort Kearny. Flora stumbled, her ankle twisting on a hidden hole. She fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Behind her, the men were gaining ground. Her own brothers, hunting her like a criminal. In desperation, she crawled toward a thicket of cottonwoods near the creek. With astonishing strength, the man pulled her onto his horse in one fluid motion. His arm wrapped around her waist as he spurred the horse forward, away from her pursuers. "Hang on tight," he instructed, his voice low and steady. Flora clung to the stranger as they thundered across the prairie, the wind whipping her long, auburn hair free from its pins. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the darkness swallowing them as they put distance between themselves and her family. Only when they reached a dense stand of pines did the man slow his horse to a walk. "I reckon we've lost them for now," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "You all right, miss?" Flora nodded, suddenly aware of her compromising position pressed against a complete stranger, her skirts hiked scandalously high. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you for your help, mister." Ryder Kincaid." He guided his horse to a small clearing. "Most folks just call me Kincaid." In the pale moonlight, Flora got her first good look at her rescuer. He couldn't be much older than her own 22 years, perhaps 25 or 26. His face was handsome but weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. Dark hair curled from beneath a well-worn Stetson, and his eyes, piercing even in the dim light, studied her with equal curiosity. "Flora Garrison," she replied, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Kincaid." "No need for debt between neighbors," he said easily, dismounting in one smooth motion. He reached up to help her down, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. "Those men chasing you, family?" Flora stiffened. "My father and brothers." Ryder nodded as if this explained everything. "And they were chasing you because I fell in love with someone they disapprove of." Flora lifted her chin defiantly, though her voice trembled. Ryder unsaddled his horse, working methodically in the moonlight. "Must be quite the disapproval to warrant hunting you down with guns." "He's half-Crow," Flora said, watching carefully for his reaction. "Elijah II Hawks. He works as a translator at Fort Kearny." If Ryder was surprised or disgusted, he didn't show it. Instead, he simply nodded and continued his work. "And you were running to him?" Flora looked away. "No. He was killed 3 days ago, ambushed on the road to the fort." Her voice broke. "My father's men, I'm certain of it. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Said it was for my own good." The tears came again, hot and angry. "Tonight they caught me packing to leave. Father said I was dead to them, now banished for bringing shame to the family name." Ryder stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. After a moment, he simply said, "Love itself ain't ever wrong, Miss Garrison." The simple statement, delivered without judgment or pity, broke something loose inside Flora. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed for Elijah, for herself, for the life she'd lost in a single night. She felt Ryder's hesitant hand on her shoulder, an awkward attempt at comfort. "I've got a cabin about an hour's ride from here," he said quietly. "It ain't much, but you'd be safe there tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out where you might go." Flora looked up at him, this stranger who'd risked himself to save her without knowing anything about her situation. "Why are you helping me?" In the moonlight, his mouth curved in a half-smile. "Let's just say I've got no love for men who hunt their own kin like animals." He handed her a handkerchief. "Besides, my ma would haunt me if I left a lady alone in the wilderness at night." The ride to Ryder's cabin was largely silent. Flora's arms wrapped around his waist as exhaustion and grief caught up with her. By the time they arrived at the small log structure nestled against a hillside, she was nearly asleep in the saddle. The cabin was indeed modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a collection of tools and supplies organized neatly around the space. What struck Flora most, however, was the cleanliness. For a bachelor living alone in the wilderness, Ryder Kincaid kept a surprisingly tidy home. "You take the bed," he said, lighting a lamp. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You've had a hard enough day without sleeping on the floor." Too exhausted to argue, Flora accepted a spare shirt he offered for her to sleep in and turned her back as she quickly changed behind a blanket he hung for privacy. The shirt smelled of pine soap and open air, and it fell nearly to her knees. When she emerged, Ryder had already made a pallet for himself near the fireplace and was busying himself with starting a small fire. "Are you hungry?" he asked without looking up. "No, thank you." Flora sat tentatively on the edge of the bed. "Mr. Kincaid, I don't know how to repay your kindness." "There's nothing to repay." "Thank you," she whispered, tears sliding silently into the pillow. Dawn arrived with pale fingers of light stretching through the cabin's single window. Flora woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting the events of the previous night. The reality came crashing back: Elijah's death, her banishment, her desperate flight. Ryder was already up, cooking something over the fire that smelled surprisingly good. He nodded at her. "Morning. Hope you like flapjacks." "I do, thank you." Flora smoothed her hair self-consciously, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "Might I? Is there somewhere I could wash up?" Ryder pointed to a door she hadn't noticed the night before. "Pumps out back. There's soap and a clean towel on the shelf." The cold water was bracing but welcome, and Flora did her best to make herself presentable with the limited resources available. When she returned to the cabin, wearing her own clothes again but with Ryder's shirt folded neatly under her arm, he had set the table with 2 plates of flapjacks, a jar of honey, and 2 cups of strong coffee. "I need to return to town today," Ryder said as they ate. "I've got supplies to pick up, and I need to check my trap lines. But it ain't safe for you there yet." He looked at her directly. "You got any place you can go? Any kin outside of Cottonwood Creek?" Flora shook her head. "My mother's sister lives in St. Louis, but I've no money for passage." She pushed her food around her plate. "I had planned to use Elijah's savings to start over somewhere new. But you never got the chance," Ryder finished for her. He was quiet for a moment. "You could stay here while I'm gone. It's safe enough. Nobody comes this way except me." "I couldn't impose. It ain't an imposition if I'm offering." He stood and carried his plate to a basin of water. "Truth is, I'd feel better knowing you weren't wandering alone. Your pa sounds like the kind who doesn't give up easy." Fear curled in Flora's stomach. "You're right about that." "Then it's settled. You'll stay here today. I'll be back by nightfall with supplies." He paused. "And maybe some news about what's being said in town." After Ryder left, Flora took stock of her situation. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and a small brooch pinned inside her bodice, her mother's, the only valuable she'd managed to grab in her hasty departure. No money, no possessions, and now, no future with the man she'd planned to marry. To keep her mind from spiraling, she set about cleaning the already tidy cabin. She swept the floor, washed the breakfast dishes, and even attempted to mend a tear in one of Ryder's shirts she found in a basket. The simple domestic tasks helped calm her nerves, giving her hands something to do while her mind worked through her limited options. One of them, she realized with horror, was her oldest brother, James. Flora looked frantically around the cabin for someplace to hide, but it was too late. They'd already spotted the smoke from the chimney. She grabbed a hunting knife from Ryder's table and backed toward the far wall as the door burst open. James Garrison filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light. At 28, he was the image of their father, tall, powerfully built, with the same cruel twist to his mouth. Well, he drawled. "Look what we found, boys. That cowboy of yours ain't much for covering his trail. What do you want, James?" Flora raised the knife higher. "I'm not coming home. Father made it clear I'm no longer welcome." "Oh, we ain't here to bring you home." James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Pa says if you want to live like a whore, that's your choice. But we can't have you spreading tales about the family. Bad for business, you understand. Cold fear washed over Flora as she realized their intent. You're going to kill me, just like you killed Elijah. William had the decency to look uncomfortable, but James just shrugged. Nobody's going to miss another fallen woman, especially not one who consorted with Indians. As James moved toward her, Flora slashed with the knife, catching him across the forearm. He cursed, grabbing her wrist so hard she felt bones grinding together. The knife clattered to the floor. You always were a stubborn little. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. James staggered, a look of confusion crossing his face as a bloom of red spread across his chest. He crumpled to the floor as Flora screamed. In the doorway stood Ryder Kincaid, a smoking revolver in his hand. Without hesitation, he aimed at William. Step away from her, or you'll join your brother. William raised his hand slowly. Beside him, Tucker reached for his own gun, but Ryder was faster. The second shot caught the ranch hand in the shoulder, spinning him backward onto the porch. William, Flora gasped, still pressed against the wall. Don't be a fool. Go home. For a moment, her brother's face reflected conflict. Then, perhaps seeing something in Ryder's eyes, he backed toward the door. This ain't over, he said, his voice shaking. Pa will come for you both. Then he'll meet the same welcome, Ryder replied coldly. Take your friend and your brother's body and ride out. Now, when the three horses finally disappeared down the trail, Flora's legs gave way. She slid down the wall, trembling uncontrollably. Ryder knelt beside her, setting his gun aside. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes searching her face. Flora shook her head, unable to speak. Her gaze moved to the bloodstain on his cabin floor where James had fallen. I didn't mean to kill him, Ryder said quietly. Aimed for his shoulder, but he moved at the last second. I'm afraid you're stuck with me for now. His expression softened slightly. Besides, that cabin was just a place to sleep. No great loss. They rode hard through the afternoon, taking deer trails and stream beds to mask their passage. Ryder was clearly familiar with the territory, navigating the rugged landscape with confidence even as the sky darkened with approaching rain. By nightfall, they were forced to make camp in a sheltered ravine. The rain had held off, but the air was heavy with moisture. Ryder built a small, nearly smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. I'm sorry about your brother, he said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them all day. Flora stared into the fire. He made his choice, just as I made mine. She looked up at Ryder. But you had no part in this. You shouldn't have to run because of me. Ryder's laugh was short and humorless. Trust me, Miss Garrison, I was running long before I met you. From what? He poked at the fire with a stick. The war, mostly. Memories that won't let me be. You fought for the Union? Flora guessed, noting his lack of Southern accent. I did. But you're right about one thing, your father won't see it that way. Once we reach Holt's place, we'll need to decide what comes next. They fell silent again, each lost in thought as the fire crackled between them. Eventually, Ryder offered her his bedroll. I'll take first watch, he said. Try to get some sleep. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Flora. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James falling, the shock on his face as life left him. Whatever his faults, he had been her brother. Throughout the telling, Holt's expression remained impassive, though his eyes occasionally flicked to Flora with something like sympathy. Garrison, he said when Ryder finished. That would be Jeremiah Garrison? Owns the big spread east of Cottonwood Creek. Flora nodded. My father. Holt whistled low. Man's got a reputation for holding grudges and having a long reach. He looked at Ryder. You've stepped in at this time, friend. I didn't exactly have a choice, Ryder replied. No, I don't suppose you did. Holt seemed to come to a decision. Well, you're both welcome here for as long as you need. I've got a cabin near the south pasture where you'll be out of sight. He glanced at Flora. And my wife will be glad for some female company. Been just her and our daughter since my sister moved to California last year. True to his word, Samuel Holt's wife Martha welcomed Flora with open arms. After providing her with a hot bath and clean clothes, Martha settled her in the cozy family kitchen with a cup of tea and a sympathetic ear. Samuel told me what happened, she said, her kind face creased with concern. The Holt's 15-year-old daughter, Emma, brought her a plate of stew and fresh bread, chatting easily about life on the ranch and asking innocent questions about Flora's life back east, as she put it. Later, as Martha showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom in the main house, Flora finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Where will Mr. Kincaid stay?" Martha smiled knowingly. "In the bunkhouse with the hands, as is proper. Samuel may be willing to harbor fugitives, but he still insists on decorum." Her eyes twinkled. Emma appointed herself Flora's personal guide, showing her around the ranch and introducing her to the animals with childlike enthusiasm. Ryder, meanwhile, earned his keep by working with Samuel's men, breaking new horses and mending fences. Flora saw him mainly at mealtimes, when all the ranch hands gathered in the main house to eat. He was unfailingly polite but distant, as if their shared ordeal had created a barrier rather than a bond between them. One evening, unable to sleep, Flora slipped outside to sit on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. She wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the cool, clean air. "Couldn't sleep?" Ryder's voice startled her. He stepped from the shadows at the end of the porch, a rolled cigarette between his fingers. "No," Flora admitted. "Too many thoughts." Ryder nodded as if he understood perfectly. He leaned against the porch railing, his profile illuminated by moonlight. "Any regrets?" "About leaving, I mean." Flora considered the question. "I regret the way it happened." A small smile touched her lips. "We met at the general store. I dropped a package, and he picked it up. Such a simple beginning." "How long were you courting?" Ryder asked. 6 months, secretly. He knew my father would never approve." Flora sighed. "We were planning to leave together, go north to Canada. Elijah had family there, on a reservation. You were willing to leave everything behind." "What was I leaving, really?" "A father who saw me as property, brothers who followed his example." Flora shook her head. "With Elijah, I felt seen for the first time. Not as Jeremiah Garrison's daughter, not as a potential wife or mother, but as myself." Ryder studied her thoughtfully. "You're an unusual woman, Miss Garrison." "Flora," she corrected. "After everything we've been through, surely we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Flora, then." He crushed out his cigarette. "And I'm Ryder." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. "What will you do now?" Ryder asked eventually. Once things quiet down, Flora had been pondering this very question for days. "I had thought to find work in a larger town. Teaching, perhaps. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut before my mother died and father brought us west." "You'd make a fine teacher," Ryder said, and there was no mockery in his tone. "And you?" Flora asked. "Will you go back to your cabin?" Ryder shook his head. "Too risky for a while. Your father's men will be watching it." He looked out at the dark landscape. "I've been thinking of heading further west. Oregon, maybe. Or California. Fresh start." The thought of Ryder leaving, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected hollow feeling in Flora's chest. Before she could examine the sensation too closely, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness. Ryder was immediately alert, one hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Wake Samuel." Flora hurried into the house as Ryder melted into the shadows. By the time she'd roused Samuel Holt, several more of the ranch hands had been awakened by the commotion. They gathered on the porch, rifles ready, as 3 riders approached the main house. To everyone's surprise, the lead rider was the sheriff from Cottonwood Creek, John Mercer. An older man with a weathered face and graying mustache, Sheriff Mercer had been a fixture in the town for as long as Flora could remember. "Evening, Holt," he called, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Sorry to disturb you at this hour." "What brings you out here, Sheriff?" Samuel asked, his rifle not quite pointed at the visitors, but not lowered either. "Looking for Miss Garrison," Mercer replied, "and the man she's traveling with." Flora stepped forward, despite Samuel's attempt to keep her behind him. "I'm here, Sheriff Mercer." The sheriff's expression softened slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Flora, your father's got half the territory looking for you." "I'm sure he does," Flora replied coldly. "Has he told you why?" "Claims you ran off with a man who killed your brother James." Mercer's eyes searched the gathering. "That man wouldn't happen to be around, would he?" Ryder stepped out of the shadows, his gun holstered but his posture tense. "I'm Ryder Kincaid, Sheriff." Flora asked, hardly daring to hope. "I believe you believe what you're saying," Mercer replied diplomatically. "And I've known Jeremiah Garrison long enough to know he's capable of most of what you're describing." He looked at Ryder. "But the fact remains, you shot a man dead." "Defending myself and Miss Garrison," Ryder pointed out. "They broke into my home with intent to harm." "So you say?" The sheriff drummed his fingers on the table. "Here's how I see it. There's no witnesses except the three of you. William Garrison is saying his brother was murdered in cold blood. That's the question, isn't it?" He looked from Flora to Ryder. "If I bring you both in, can you guarantee a fair hearing? Garrison's got influence with Judge Wilson. Money talks in Cottonwood Creek, same as anywhere." "Then what's the alternative?" Samuel asked. "They can't stay here forever, and they can't keep running." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "I came here expecting to find a killer and a runaway girl," he said finally. "What I found is more complicated." He set down his cup. "Here's what I propose. Miss Garrison, you write a full account of everything that happened, from your relationship with Mr. Two Hawks to your brother's death. Sign it as a sworn statement. I'll take it back to town and file it officially." "And then what?" Ryder asked suspiciously. "And then I tell Jeremiah Garrison that if anything happens to either of you, if you disappear, have an accident, anything, I'll make that statement public. Every newspaper from here to Denver will get a copy." Mercer's eyes hardened. Garrison cares about his reputation almost as much as he cares about his money. That should give him pause. "You're not arresting us?" Flora asked, confused. "No, miss, I'm not." Mercer sighed. "Maybe that makes me a poor excuse for a lawman, but I've seen enough to know that sometimes the law and justice ain't the same thing." He looked at Ryder. "I'd suggest you both consider leaving the territory, though. Give this time to blow over." The relief that flooded through Flora was tinged with the bitterness of exile. To leave Montana would mean abandoning any hope of justice for Elijah, of ever clearing his name or properly mourning him. As if reading her thoughts, Sheriff Mercer added gently, "I'll also look into what happened to your young man, Miss Garrison. If there's evidence to be found about his death, I'll find it." After the sheriff left with Flora's signed statement, the Holt household slowly returned to sleep. But Flora found herself once again restless, her mind racing with the implications of the night's events. She slipped outside again, unsurprised to find Ryder already there, leaning against the corral fence and staring up at the stars. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking at her. "Too much to think about." Flora joined him at the fence. "I feel like I should be relieved, but instead I just feel empty." Ryder nodded. "The sheriff's right, you know. We should leave Montana." "We?" Flora glanced at him, catching the profile of his face in the moonlight. Ryder turned to look at her directly. "I won't force my company on you, Flora, but I'd like to see you safely to wherever you decide to go." "That's very gallant," she said softly. "But you've already risked enough for me. I couldn't ask for more." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He hesitated. "Truth is, I've been thinking of moving on for a while now. What happened just pushed the timeline." Flora studied him. This enigmatic man who had become so central to her life in such a short time. "Where would we go?" "Oregon has good land, I hear. Fertile valleys, mild winters." Ryder's eyes held hers. "A person could build something there. A new life. Together?" Flora asked, her heart beating faster. "If that's what you want." Ryder's voice was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes made Flora's breath catch. "I know it's soon after your loss." When he turned, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled cheek. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to see Oregon. With you." The smile that transformed his face made him look younger, almost boyish. "Yeah. Yes." Flora nodded, suddenly certain. "But I need you to understand something. I loved Elijah. Part of me always will." "I'd never ask you to forget him," Ryder said, covering her hand with his own. "Love doesn't work that way. It grows to include more, not less." Standing there in the moonlight, Flora felt something settle inside her, not an end to grief, but the beginning of hope. "When would we leave?" "Soon," Ryder said. "I've got some money saved. Enough to get us to Oregon and buy a small plot of land." He smiled again. "Though we might need to get married first. For propriety's sake." Flora laughed softly. "Propriety? After everything we've been through?" especially after everything we've been through. Ryder's expression grew serious. I want to do right by you, Flora. No whispers or sidelong glances when we reach our new home. Then I accept, Flora said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Though it's hardly the most romantic proposal a girl could hope for. Ryder's laugh was warm in the cool night air. I'll work on that part. They began preparations the next day. Martha Holt, delighted by the news of their engagement, insisted on helping Flora sew a simple wedding dress and assemble a modest trousseau from her own spare fabrics and clothing. Samuel offered to stand as witness and arrange for the local circuit preacher to visit the ranch the following Sunday. It's not the wedding you might have dreamed of, Martha said apologetically as she pinned the hem of a pale blue cotton dress they decided would serve as Flora's wedding gown. It's perfect, Flora assured her. More than I could have hoped for under the circumstances. Martha smiled, sitting back on her heels. You know, when Samuel first brought Ryder around, I thought him the loneliest man I'd ever met. Always polite, always helpful, but keeping the world at arm's length. She met Flora's eyes. He's different with you. There's a light in him that wasn't there before. Flora felt a warmth spread through her chest. He saved me when I had nothing left. I think perhaps we saved each other. The simple ceremony took place in the Holt's parlor on a bright Sunday morning in late April. Flora, dressed in the blue cotton dress with wildflowers in her hair, felt a curious calm as Samuel walked her in to where Ryder waited with the preacher. Gone was the hunted girl who had fled her father's house. In her place stood a woman choosing her own path forward. Ryder had cleaned up impressively for the occasion. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved, and he wore a new shirt that Samuel had insisted on giving him. But it was the look in his eyes as Flora approached that took her breath away, a mixture of wonder, tenderness, and something that might, with time, become love. The preacher kept the ceremony brief, for which Flora was grateful. When Ryder slid a simple silver band onto her finger, another of Martha's contributions, a family piece she insisted she'd never wear again and promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life, Flora felt tears sting her eyes. Not for what she had lost, but for what she had unexpectedly found. Their wedding night was spent in the cabin near the south pasture, which the Holts had insisted they take as a wedding gift. It was a bit awkward at first, both of them hyper-aware of their new status as husband and wife. But Ryder, true to his nature, was patient and gentle, giving Flora time to grow comfortable with their new intimacy. We don't have to rush anything, he told her as they sat before the fire, sharing a bottle of whiskey Samuel had provided. This is just the beginning. Flora smiled, reaching for his hand. I'm not as fragile as you seem to think, Ryder Kincaid. That night, in the small bed they now shared, Flora discovered a different side to her quiet, reserved husband. His hands, calloused from years of hard work, moved over her body with surprising tenderness. His kisses, hesitant at first, grew more confident as she responded to him. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Flora found herself swept away by sensations she had never experienced, never even imagined. Afterward, lying in his arms as the fire burned low, Flora felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? Ryder asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. For saying that love itself ain't ever wrong. Flora raised herself on one elbow to look at him. That first night, when I told you about Elijah, that's what you said. I've never forgotten it. Ryder's eyes were serious in the firelight. I meant it then. I mean it now. 2 days later, they were ready to depart. Samuel had provided them with a sturdy wagon, provisions for the journey, and a team of horses. Martha had packed linens, cooking utensils, and other necessities a young couple would need to establish a home. This is too much, Flora protested as she hugged the older woman goodbye. We can never repay such generosity. Then don't try, Martha said firmly. Just be happy. That's repayment enough. As they were making their final preparations, a rider approached from the direction of Cottonwood Creek. Flora's heart sank when she recognized William, her middle brother. Ryder immediately moved to stand protectively in front of her, his hand on his gun. William reined in his horse at a safe distance, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. I'm alone, he called. Just want to talk. Samuel and his ranch hands had surrounded the visitor, rifles ready. State your business and be quick about it, Samuel ordered. William's eyes found Flora. I came to say goodbye, sister. And to apologize. Apologize. Flora stepped around Ryder, ignoring his attempt to keep her back. For trying to kill me? William had the grace to look ashamed. I never wanted that. It was James and Pa pushing it. He swallowed hard. Sheriff Mercer came by with your statement. Made Pa read it in front of me. Made me see what we'd done, what I'd let happen. And Father? Flora asked, her voice tight. Does he share your sudden remorse? No, William admitted. He's still furious. Says you're dead to him. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, which he extended toward her. But Ma wouldn't let it rest. Made me bring you this. Flora hesitated, then stepped forward to take the envelope. Inside was a note in her mother's elegant handwriting, along with several bank notes totaling a substantial sum. Your inheritance from Grandmother Garrison, William explained. Pa couldn't touch it, it was set aside specifically for you. Ma had the bank draw it out. He looked at her directly. It's not much, but it might help you start over somewhere new. Flora stared at the money in shock. Why would Mother do this? She never stood up to Father before. Maybe seeing how far he was willing to go scared her. William shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Or maybe she just finally reached her limit. Thank her for me, Flora said, still stunned by this unexpected development. William nodded. I will. He looked at Ryder. Take care of my sister, Kincaid. She deserves better than what our family gave her. That's one thing we agree on, Ryder replied, his tone less hostile than before. As William turned his horse to leave, Flora called after him. William, what about Elijah? His killers, her brother looked back, his expression grim. Sheriff's investigating. Tucker's been arrested already. Sang like a bird once he was in custody. He hesitated. I didn't know about that, Flora. I swear it. That was Pa and James's doing. After William disappeared down the trail, Flora stood clutching her mother's letter, tears streaming silently down her face. Not tears of grief this time, but of release, as if the last chains binding her to her past had finally broken. Ryder came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. You all right? Flora nodded, leaning into his strength. I am now. She looked up at him, a smile breaking through her tears. Let's go see Oregon. The journey west was long and challenging. They joined a wagon train in Fort Benton, traveling with a dozen other families seeking new beginnings in the Oregon Territory. Each day brought new tests, river crossings, steep mountain passes, bouts of bad weather, and the constant concern about adequate food and water for themselves and their animals. Yet amidst the hardships, Flora discovered unexpected joys. The breathtaking beauty of landscapes she'd never imagined. The camaraderie of the traveling community, sharing meals and stories around campfires each night. And most of all, the deepening bond with Ryder, who proved himself not just a skilled frontiersman, but a thoughtful, considerate husband. At night, in the privacy of their wagon, they explored each other with increasing familiarity and passion. Flora sometimes felt guilty at how quickly she had moved from grieving Elijah to finding happiness with Ryder. But as the miles stretched behind them, she came to understand that her love for Ryder didn't diminish what she had felt for Elijah. It was simply different, built on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual respect that grew stronger each day. By late summer, they reached the lush Willamette Valley in western Oregon. After consulting with local settlers, Ryder purchased 100 acres of promising land near a small but growing town called Mill Creek. The property included a modest cabin that needed work but would serve as shelter while they established themselves. What do you think? Ryder asked anxiously as they stood on a hill overlooking their new home. Below them, the cabin sat beside a clear stream, surrounded by fertile fields and bordered by forest to the west. Flora squeezed his hand, her heart full. It's perfect. Their first year in Oregon tested them in new ways. The cabin roof leaked during the fall rains. Their first attempt at a vegetable garden yielded mixed results. A mountain lion carried off 2 of their newly acquired chickens. But through it all, they worked side by side, learning together how to make this wild place a home. Flora found unexpected fulfillment in the pioneer life. She learned to preserve food for winter, to make soap and candles, to identify useful wild plants. And when the town's small school lost its teacher mid-year, she stepped in, using her education to serve the community while bringing in extra income. Ryder, meanwhile, proved himself an able farmer and a valued neighbor, always ready to help with barn raisings or harvest. His quiet competence earned him the respect of the other men, while his obvious devotion to Flora endeared him to the women of Mill Creek. One evening in early spring of their second year, as they sat on the porch of their much-improved cabin watching the sunset, Flora turned to her husband with a smile that couldn't be contained. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The wonder that spread across Ryder's face was something Flora knew she would remember all her days. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "You're sure?" Flora nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. September, he thinks." As Flora nursed her daughter in the rocking chair Ryder had made for them, she reflected on the winding path that had led her here. The loss and grief that had seemed unbearable 2 years ago had somehow transformed into this quiet joy, this sense of rightness. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, kneeling beside them to stroke Elizabeth's downy head. "About how life takes unexpected turns," Flora replied. "How sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of something new." Ryder nodded, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. "When I found you that night, running through the tall grass, I was just trying to do the right thing." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I never imagined you'd become my whole world." In the years that followed, the Kincaid family prospered. They added on to their cabin, creating a comfortable home filled with books, music, and laughter. 2 more children joined Elizabeth Robert Samuel in 1877 and Catherine Rose in 1880. Ryder's farm became known for its fine horses and quality produce, while Flora's reputation as a teacher led to her appointment as headmistress when Mill Creek built its first proper school. Occasionally, news would reach them from Montana. Martha Holt wrote regularly, keeping them informed of developments in Cottonwood Creek. Sheriff Mercer had indeed pursued the investigation into Elijah Two Hawk's murder, resulting in the conviction and hanging of 2 of Jeremiah Garrison's ranch hands. Garrison himself had escaped legal consequences, but had lost standing in the community as the truth emerged. When Flora was 30, a letter arrived bearing news that her father had died of a stroke. She felt a complex mixture of emotions, not grief exactly, but a sense of closure. William, now running the family ranch, extended an invitation for her to visit, to meet her nieces and nephews who knew of her only through stories. "Do you want to go?" Ryder asked as they discussed it that night. Flora considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "That part of my life is finished. My family is here now." She looked around their cozy parlor, where their children slept peacefully upstairs and photographs of their life together lined the walls. "This is home." Ryder smiled, drawing her into his arms. "You never cease to amaze me, Flora Kincaid. Because I don't want to revisit the past? Because you've always had the courage to choose your own path." He kissed her softly. "From the moment I met you, you were fighting for the right to love on your own terms." Flora rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Love itself ain't ever wrong," she quoted softly. "The wisest words I ever heard." On their 20th wedding anniversary, the entire town of Mill Creek, now a thriving community of several hundred people, gathered to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of local society. There was a dance in the town hall, with speeches and toasts and plenty of good-natured teasing about how the quiet trapper and the educated Easterner had built one of the most successful marriages anyone had seen. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, Ryder presented Flora with a gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. "It's beautiful," Flora said, touching it reverently. "Thank you. I have one more gift," Ryder said, taking her hand. "Come outside." He led her to their porch, where a new rocking chair sat beside her old one. But what drew Flora's attention was the small sapling planted in their front yard, illuminated by the light from the house. "A cottonwood tree," Ryder explained. I thought it might be nice to have something from where we began." Flora touched the slender trunk, tears filling her eyes. "After all these years, you still surprise me." "Good surprises, I hope," Ryder said, drawing her close. "The best kind." Flora looked up at the man who had rescued her in more ways than he would ever know. The boy soldier who had seen too much death had become a man who created life and beauty wherever he went. The lonely trapper had become the center of a loving family and respected community. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, taking a chance on a desperate woman running through the tall grass. Ryder's laugh was warm in the cool evening air. Not for a single moment. His arms tightened around her. "You were worth every risk, Flora Kincaid. Every mile, every struggle, every uncertain day." As they stood together under the stars, Flora thought about the long, winding road that had led them here from tragedy to triumph, from loss to love. She had been banished for loving wrong, but Ryder had shown her that love itself was never wrong. And in that truth, they had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined on that desperate night so many years ago. "Come on," she said, taking her husband's hand. "Let's go inside. We've got many more years ahead of us, and I plan to enjoy every one." And as they walked back into the home they had built together, Flora knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as an act of kindness on a dark Montana night had grown into the greatest blessing of her life, a love strong enough to weather any storm, deep enough to heal any wound, and true enough to last a lifetime.